Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful individuals. It is another epi of League Unlock. Here we mark you fine, feathered individuals for the finale of qualification, round one, first stand, whatever you want to call it, the last stand for the West as a whole at this tournament. And, you know, both matchups delivered at least what we were asking for. They were not stomps, or at least stomps in the way you weren't expecting. And with that, we start on the positive, happy side of things on the day, and that is G2 showing up in the biggest way. First time in 6 years. Last time G2 did it against Gen G, and that is a European team beating an LCK squad in a best of 5. And boy, do they do it in dominant fashion.
They did it in dominant fashion, and it's the other 4 members of G2, not named Caps in the mid lane, being the dominant forces that push and propel G2 to this 3-0 victory through this series. There's a lot to dive into this one on the good side of G2, and you can, as listed out there, it all starts not with a player named Caps in the mid lane. He's continued to struggle, and that's something that I think we can talk about and examine moving forward. But the more exciting option for G2 is the fact that everybody else, Broken Blade, Skumon, Labrav, Hanzama, stepping up and delivering a mega performance in this series.
Yeah, I think Hanzama, the bot lane and Skumon especially, are the main highlights here, and Hanzama, they played around so perfectly. Gotta still highlight Caps. You know, they had the comms of him calling for this arrow in the mid lane when he's on LeBlanc. You know, he calls for it. He obviously needs the help because he was getting pumped in the laning phase, and Hans nails it. But perfect team fighting. He was gliding on both the Ashe and the Corki. He popped off on both of those first 2 games. He ended up getting player of the series, well-deserved, but especially those first 2 games. And also got to highlight Labrav on the Nami, because the amount of double bubbles this dude was landing in that game, off the charts.
Unfair some of these ones that he's hitting, and it was just so good. And yes, I think Hanzama especially deserves his recognition. Got a little bit of criticism in the last time around for G2, so someone that we wanted that bounce back performance, and questioned whether he could get this type of hold, take this type of advantage in this series against what was going to be the hyped up bot lane of BFX and what they could present and the threat that they represent. It was nothing to the duo of G2, and especially Hanzama, even in that 1v1 when we're looking at that examination against Diablo. He had it every single time, the answer, and this really is, I think, one of his finest series on the international stage.
And, you know, we say this was a stomp, but there were still very much important key turning points. The theme of the day, as we'll get to the later series, is 6K gold leads, because in the second game, BFX are up about that 6K, and it's one overextension in the bot lane that gets G2 some shutdowns, a whole bunch of gold back into it, and they quickly, completely flip the game on its head from there. But that one play in the bot lane very much felt like the turning point for this series.
It's become one of these things that has clearly been an after effect of all of the changes. And I mean all of the changes that have gone into this game year after year as we go through the different seasons. One of the impacts of all these ones that snowballed and combined together is that some of these gold leads, they're just not nearly as impactful as you would think they are if you do overextend, overplay your hand in any of these situations, and let something as explosive as some of these fights go back in the favor, in the economy of your enemy team. You're right back in the door. You're right back in the game because you have other avenues to then push that advantage, push those death timer times and things and whatnot and everything else. And you saw that used to a great effect in that game too by G2.
And we so often, when there are these bigger gold leads, we so often have one guy that's like 50% of that gold lead single-handedly, right? And if they get blown up in a fight before they do anything, well, the gold lead was non-existent for this fight. And you saw that multiple times throughout the day today. But Caps, you know, gets one good Azir shuffle, but he's behind 2 levels the entire game and basically irrelevant. This is a nerfed Azir on the latest patch, and it definitely showed in that one. But he did show up in Game 3, had a more typical performance out of Caps on the Zoe in that third game. But this, again, was a really good early game from BFX and didn't look like this was going to be a sweep.
Which I didn't, it wasn't obviously such an eye-catching performance on the Zoe, but I will say Caps on Zoe is one of the comfort foods of all comfort foods in League of Legends. There's just something about the grossness that champion can put out on Summoner's Rift in the hands of the calm, cool, and collected Caps in the mid lane. You love to see it, and he was dishing out some sleepy trouble bubble time kills out there on Summoner's Rift as well. Again, Hansama, the one that I keep coming back to, having a fantastic one, leading the charge for G2. But again, a lot of the setup for those plays is Skumund, is Labrov having their series of their G2 careers so far. And this was really one of the big moments for them.
Yeah, I mean, Skumon proving why Jarvan should be banned against him, and Pantheon and a whole lot of other junglers. But a little surprised. I feel like the Ezreal should have been dropped in for Diablo in Game 3. It had been banned the first 2 games. They had this poke comp. They opt for the Varus first. I feel like Ezreal's a pick we know. We've seen him completely dominate on. And the other, not surprised, but interesting angle for this set was BB played Cassante, Ornn, and Sion. He was fully on the tank machine in this set.
He was a beefy boy today up in that top side. But again, playing to what was the strategy, what was the play on the day, was having it be Hansama, Hans Mama, dishing out the damage like he was, cooking up in the bottom lane. And if that requires BB to be just simply Mr. Boring, not having a fun time because you're playing the tanks, that's the role you got to play on this team. And that was really worked well by all of G2. And I think the fact that you didn't see the Ezreal come through was mainly just disrespect against G2, because I think that's a situation where you are saving the Ezreal for a crucial game 4, game 5 type of situation where you can use it as a big pivot point. You never got to that pivot point because you had to get through that 3rd game. And I think that is, again, as you laid out, one of the crucial mistakes, not handing over your most comfortable, most powerful champion to the guy that is your most high-octane engine on the team, and why you have the level of success that you've been able to so far this year. I think that is a major oversight from the BFX side.
And now it's a theme of we haven't seen BNK win series when Diablo isn't, one of the first 2 guys you're talking about, and that has been throughout basically this entire split. But we say farewell to them, and G2 keep the hopes and dreams of the West alive. Unfortunately for them, it's Gen G next on the docket for them. So the top 4 finish, though, you're happy with as an EU, and probably should be as a G2 fan. If you get eliminated by Gen G in the semifinals of this event, I'm calling that a win.
You're, at the end of the day, kind of loser talk situation. You're just aiming to be competitive. How much can you push? Can you get one? Can you maybe get that 2nd win against Gen G? These type of things have to be where you're pushing it, and then of course you take it where it goes on the day, within that series, within that immediate individual type of moment. Going to be a tough task, but I'll say again, you mentioned this is the first time in more or less 6 years that the LEC has gotten one of these big series wins against the LCK. The last time they did it, Gen G, that was the squad that you took down. Now,
was Chovy on the team?
That's quite a long difference between Gen G, so it's going to be very different. But if you can pull on anything, you have to pull on any bit of history you can when you're heading into such an underdog matchup.
And Ruler was on the team then. So there is some connection there. It is doable, and he will remember what Caps' Silas did to them way back then. 6K gold leads alluded to the theme. They really were the theme in JDG versus Lyon Gaming. And I mean, a pair of throws. They exchanged 6K throws in games 1 and 2, but especially in game 1, I have never seen a 6K lead disintegrate in a single team fight. You basically see the number go down to 1K, and then JDG gets a Baron, and within 2 minutes of that comeback team fight, they're closing out the game.
That was, again, and as you talked about a bit earlier, that was one of those instances where, you really take a second to pause, look at your lead, where it's invested into, how you got it, and all these other things that are there. You would have made that equation to go, you know what? This is not an engagement that we should be taking or pushing for in this individual moment. They go full send. It does blow up in their face. And again, where the game is, what you can take in these, moments afterwards, if you are in that advantage, are big. And that is exactly where you're able to snowball it back into control. The other team is absolutely out of sorts, and you are the one dictating the pace, dictating where things are happening out on Summoner's Rift. That's how these things can happen, and I think that's exactly what you saw, again, multiple times in this series, but even more so in that examination of the Game 1 throw from Lyon.
And, I mean, truthfully, felt like the series was over at that point. At least that's what I'm thinking when the NA team blows a lead like that, and then you see a lead start ramping up for JDG, even though Berserker and Isles dominate the they're like 50 CS ahead of Gala, and you never really get to actually take over because this Rumble gets so disgustingly ahead that one equalizer is like 70% of most guys' health bars.
And that's kind of the problem again, that Rumble is certainly an example that you see can do that, but just, where you are in League of Legends right now, and top laners, solo laners having that type of availability if they get these advantages to them. And that is one of those things that is that pain point, because yes, the bottom lane for Lyon today, in almost every single game except for the crucial final one, were very much so in control and having that advantage in that individual matchup of bot lane versus bot lane. Other problems were weakening that availability to be that impactful in the game.
And, Saint had some very rough moments, but started actually ramping up, the early game in Game 3, and I think that's why this series is a little extra painful for Lyon and NA fans, because you're looking at how the early games went in basically all 4 of these, maybe not Game 2, 3 out of 4 of them, and you're going, looks good, we're in control, we should be able to dictate how this game goes, but the synergy, the communication is lost in some of these team fights. We see Inspired going in when other guys aren't there, TPs are late, just a lot of little errors that you can't make in these do or die team fights. And especially Game 4, listen, 5 jungle bans, by the way, in Game 4, so we get this Sejuani, which we know Inspired loves and is comfortable with, but how many times did we see an impactful Sejuani ult in that game? Any?
I didn't see it. Did you? I don't know what you're talking about.
I saw one get reflected with an Aphelios ult by the Mel.
And I will. That's a whole other thing to talk about. But I will mention, I think, kind of one of the angles that I think people are taking in very strangely nasty and negative light in the community is kind of some of the comms that are coming through from this with Lyon and with Inspired and how he's talking and some of these things coming through. And yeah, that absolutely is something that we know is a little bit of a history thing and whatever you're examining it. But I think it's also kind of just unfair due to the situation that is clear within Lyon that he is the only guy making these vocal communications and calls and decisions. And there is absolutely something that is positive about someone that is going to be vocal, is going to willing to be that leader in the darkness, in the quiet, to make these calls right or wrong in these situations, which, yes, some of them are flat out wrong. That is one of those things that you are going to get the red X for. But it's one of these situations where you look at all these other fantastic teams, you look at when they're at their best, it's multiple people communicating, contributing to these decisions, to what you can make, what's available, all these type of things. And I don't think that exists with this Lyon roster the same way that it did even, to a lesser degree with last year's FlyQuest, when you had at the very least Busio contributing and communicating and talking through with some of these things. So I think that's one of those angles that I would stress with Lyon Gaming needs to be something that you address here in the short term.
And I kind of blame the broadcast a little bit for throwing in, listen, before you're making sweeping judgments, a 10-second out of context clip from the heat of a moment in a high-stakes elimination match is a little unfair to be judging. Oh my God, Inspired hates his teammates and treats them all like dirt. Like, let's get a little more context before you make those judgments.
And that's one of those ones where it's like, again, it's not excusing how he's talking or communicating or anything else in these moments, but it is absolutely one of those ones where you're being done dirty by the broadcast, putting it out like that in that type of situation. So I'm not exactly thrilled with that, but I think it is one of those ones where, yes, there is a door to open and have that conversation about the communication, about how things are working with Lyon. I don't think that this is exactly the example to pinpoint and, dogpile on someone like Inspired at this point is the right call to do.
And again, you could call it loser's mentality if you want, but we didn't want to sweep here. We didn't want to get stomped. All 4 of these games were competitive. There was back and forth. It's obviously disappointing because you feel like Lyon was right there, and they could have been winning this series 3-1, easily could have gone to game 5, maybe a few 50-50 smites go their way. You can really say, okay, the Hextech Soul Smite, them getting baited or bluffed out by JDG where Gala just solos the dragon to get soul point. Like there's so many little moments that if you make one slightly different decision, maybe Lyon's coming away. But still happy with how they showcased and performed in this series, apart from probably Dokla individually.
Yeah, that one is actually a real disappointment, especially for me individually, because coming in towards this event, I had some confidence in him, and again, gave him the recognition of, we've had some up and down top side performances, but he's actually relatively been stable, and almost the entirety of this event was just a downward trend from him, starting with that Loud series and continuing into, unfortunately, this one against JDG.
Unless we get another dud out of Viper, I think we're still looking pretty clearly at a BLG Gen G finals matchup.
Yeah, I think so as well. That's absolutely one of the angles that you can look at. And I think unless it's, again, this is G2 continuing their momentum, continuing to build and bulk themselves up and strengthen against what is going to be a Goliathan task against Gen G, that's possibility number 1. Number 2 is, maybe this really is the indication that, everyone on JDG needed to maybe fully buy in to whatever Tabe is saying behind the scenes, because he wasn't happy with what was going out there on Summoner's Rift from JDG today. So that's certainly something you can maybe bank on being that bounce back. But unless it's really, where are you, Mr. Viper type of time for BLG, I don't know. I don't like JDG's chances.
The good side for JDG is BLG doesn't have a great track record of Civil War LPL matchups on the international stage. So that's, even though losing back-to-back in the LPL playoffs, that's something to look at for JDG.
That is something to look at for JDG, but that's one of those ones where BLG's never really been able to do it 3-4 times. They haven't been able to be like a Gen G where you are just this absolute Goliath at the top, always capturing the regional championship type of thing. It hasn't exactly been that sailing for BLG. It has been, you're at the top, and maybe you're at the top for 1-2, and then now you're dipping back. So it's going to be one of those ones where can you get that consecutive head-to-heads against this squad, against Tabe is going to be the big one that I'm thinking about as far as the strategy heading into that head-to-head.
At least redemption for the West, that they close things out on a positive note for Lyon. And, of course, G2 going into the weekend, going into that top 4 throwdown showdown here at First Stand. But that is it today for League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you, absolute stunners. Thanks for hanging out as always. And we will catch you on that flippity flip.